Let's continue. Chapter 35 opens with another of Cervantes' magnificent narrative interruptions. This is the famous Battle of the Wineskins, which alludes explicitly to a similar episode in Apuleius' The Golden Ass. The priest is about to finish the novel of the curious impertinent when Sancho descends from the attic, shouting that his master has stabbed that giant enemy of the lady Princess Micomicona. The priest asks how the devil can that be true, since the giant is 2,000 leagues from here. There's a loud noise upstairs, followed by the cries of Don Quixote. "Halt! Thief! Scoundrel! Coward! I have you now, and your scimitar cannot avail you." Don Quixote's reference to a scimitar suggests the 16th century struggle between the Spanish and Ottoman empires. Everyone rushes upstairs to find Don Quixote half naked and, ironically, with the innkeeper's nightcap on his head, slashing at some wineskins stored in his room. According to the narrator, Don Quixote was dreaming that he had finally reached the kingdom of Micomicon and was now locked in battle with its enemy. The innkeeper is understandably furious and attacks Don Quixote. The hullabaloo only ends when the barber douses our mad knight with a large pot of cold water from the well. This is not the novel's first well. Sancho can't understand what's happened. This isn't just ignorance. There's self-interest involved. If the giant's head is nowhere to be found, then Sancho's promised insular earldom might be slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, the innkeeper curses Don Quixote, whose soul he hopes to see swimming in hell. Here again, Cervantes foregrounds the theme of commerce. The innkeeper despaired, and he swore that this wouldn't go like the last time when they'd left without paying, and that this time talk of chivalric privileges would not be enough to avoid paying for this and that, including the cost of every last patch it would take to repair the torn wineskins. Moreover, according to the narrator, everyone was laughing but the innkeeper, who attributed his luck to Satan. Even the innkeeper's wife complains, recalling the barber's abuse of her oxtail, shouting, "They have to pay me every last quarter for it." The priest manages to bring calm, promising to make good on their losses as best he could, as much for the wineskins as the wine, and above all else for the damage to the oxtail. At this point, the narrator returns to the novel of the curious impertinent, reminding us that it was Anselmo who was the author of his own disgrace, believing that all was to his liking, and then turning to the tragic outcome. Like Lothario, Anselmo learns of Leonela's lover. The architectural description here makes the house into a metaphor for a woman's body, as well as the possessive and jealous rivalry among men that always surrounds that body. One night, Anselmo sensed footsteps in Leonela's chamber, and wanting to enter to see who it was, he sensed that the door resisted him, which made him even more anxious to open it, and he pressed so hard that he opened it and entered in time to see a man jump out the window onto the street below. Leonela explains this to her master in a way that recalls the stories of Cardenio and Dorotea. "This is my affair, and mine alone, for he's my husband." Believing the maid is lying, Anselmo pulls out his dagger, and at this point, Leonela plays the only card she has left. "Don't kill me, master, for I'll tell you things more important than you can imagine." Like Scheherazade in 1001 Nights, Leonela asks her master to wait until the next day so she can recover from her shock. When Anselmo reports this to Camila, she despairs. And that same night, when it seemed that Anselmo was asleep, she gathered her best jewels and some money, and without anyone noticing, she left the house and went to the home of Lothario. Lothario gets her to a nunnery, whose prioress was one of his sisters, and then he slipped away from the city. The next day, without even checking to see that Camila was not at his side, Anselmo went to where he had left Leonela locked away, but all he found were knotted sheets hanging from the window, a clear sign that she had climbed down from there and gone. He returned to report this to Camila, only to find her open chests and from them most of her jewelry missing. When he goes to his friend Lotario's house, the servants tell him that their master had left that night. Finally, Anselmo comprehends his misfortune. He closed the door to his house, mounted his horse, and, short of breath, he went on his way. He doesn't get far before he was forced to dismount and tie his horse to a tree, next to which he slid to the ground, heaving tender and pitiful sighs. All this should remind us of the first sally of a certain sleepwalking hidalgo. A man passes by and Anselmo asks him about Florence. This citizen tells the whole scandalous story of the two friends. It's said publicly that Lotario, that great friend of the wealthy Anselmo, who lived near San Giovanni, made off last night with Camilla, the wife of Anselmo, who has also vanished. All this has been related by one of Camilla's servants, whom the governor found last night climbing down a sheet hung from the windows of Anselmo's house. Anselmo turns pale, fatigued, and drained. Does this remind you of anyone? He goes to the house of another friend and requests writing materials. The next morning, the friend finds him lying face down, half his body in bed, and the other half slumped over the side desk, on which was opened the letter he had been writing, and he still had the pen in his hand. In the letter, Anselmo confesses that a foolish and impertinent desire took my life. He forgives Camilla because she was under no obligation to perform miracles. The letter ends with, "I was the author of my own disgrace, and there is no reason to..." And so according to the narrator, one could observe that at that point, unable to finish his sentence, his life came to an end. Everything now gyrates towards the international level as we learn that Lotario dies in a battle drawn at that time between Monsieur de la Trek and the great Captain Gonzalo Fernandez de Cordova in the Kingdom of Naples. Finally, the priest ends the novel reflecting positively on its style, although he adds, if this case had involved a lover and his lady, it would have been credible, but between a husband and his wife, there's something impossible about it. Let's review. The novel of the curious impertinent, the most Baroque narrative in Don Quixote, functions like an intratextual commentary on the chaos among the lovers of the Sierra Morena episodes. The predominance of lust, the mimetic psychology of male lovers, and the concatenation of errors, jealousy, and poetic justice. It all echoes the stories of Cardenio and Dorotea, the servant's betrayal, the disillusioned voyeur, the manly woman. Moreover, it connects back to the first chapters of Don Quixote. And it's clearly designed as some sort of allegory about the act of writing itself. Hence, Anselmo recognizes his tragedy in his final letter. There's plenty to anticipate Freud's Oedipal complex here as well. For example, Lotario projects his own sexual desires onto a mysterious phantom who turns out to be real, although not exactly the rival that he has in mind. At this same global level, the novel represents the essence of Don Quixote's psychopathology, and the captive's tale that follows will function as a kind of corrective remedy to its painful finale. Lastly, on a feminist note, consider Camila. If her behavior does not fulfill Anselmo's expectations, that is, if she doesn't work miracles, she most definitely thinks and acts on her own. Indeed, her quick thinking and forceful character make her tower above the ineptitudes of Lotario and Anselmo. Or think about this as a truly modernized tragedy. Classical tragedy portrays the fall of a proud character. But what more excessive pride can there be than believing that a woman has no other desire or will than that which her husband wants her to have?